big data analytics, data science in the tourism industry. Thank you very much for taking your time in this Tuesday morning to come along. I'm Joshua Ryan Sahar. I'm going to be facilitating the conversation today. My role is I'm the director of a Scottish travel tech cluster called Travel Tech for Scotland. And I also work at the University of Edinburgh leading data analytics and artificial intelligence for tourism and festivals here in Edinburgh. So we've got a great panel lined up today. And we're going to make a start in a couple of minutes in that discussion. First of all, just to mention, this event is hosted by CAST, which is providing incubation and acceleration support for startup companies and small SMEs around sustainable tourism. It's been a 3-year European Commission project, and it's been hugely successful, and it's great, and I use all of the resources on a day-to-day basis with Scottish travel tech companies. So thank you very much for hosting this event. So first, I'm just going to do an introduction to each of the panel members in turn. I'm doing that so we can get into the detailed conversation as quickly as possible. So first, I'm going to introduce Samantha Campbell, who is the founder and CEO of Alchemy. I've got that right, haven't I, Samantha?
Alchemy is, yes.
So based in London, I've got entrepreneurial experience across multiple startups in financial services, blockchain and data. The company, if I'm right, has been set up since 2019. And there's some really interesting bits of discussion you're going to have around about alternative data sets, the value of data. Yeah. So thank you so much for joining us, Samantha.
Thank you. Second
of all, I'm going to introduce Ulf Sontag. He's the head of market research and the associate director at the International Institute for Tourism Research. And a huge background in tourism marketing experience, and really look forward to talking to you today around some of the opportunities around data, especially at the destination level. So thank you so much for joining us. Thirdly, I'm going to introduce Eleonora Pantano, who is a senior lecturer at the University of Bristol and has some really interesting experience looking at the adoption and use of machine learning, artificial intelligence, and data research in tourism, something that I'm particularly interested in. So really looking forward to hearing you talk. Fourth, I'm going to introduce Daniele Rizzi from DG Connect, and has been leading the work on the Open Data Directive, which is, I was looking at it the other day, and is extremely interesting and very, very powerful resource. So I can't wait to hear a little bit more from you, Daniele. And finally, last, certainly not least, Ivan Iljasic. Have I pronounced that correctly, Ivan? Great. I did live in Croatia for a little bit of time, so I was hoping to get that right. Who is the founder and CEO of a great travel tech company called Orioli, and who are doing some really interesting smart destination solutions. And I'm sure we'll hear a little bit more about that as well. So thank you all for joining us today. And in terms of the questions, I'm going to start with a question for you, Ulf. And that question is, how has access to different, varied, larger data sets changed the way that we promote and manage tourism destinations? And in particular, how do you see that supporting sustainable tourism?
That's a complex question, and I think it also requires a little bit of complex answer, and also maybe a little bit of background with me and with the NIT. Because it's basically exactly where we're coming from. The company was founded 30 years ago to support destinations and tourism companies with basically supplying them with data, supplying them with insights concerning strategic decisions in management and marketing. And so this is where we are coming from. We are coming more from the question and from these support ideas. And we're using a lot of data. We also producing a lot of data, but we always come from the question. So we never come from the data alone. And this also brings us, I think, in a position where we are quite critical, and we also tell our clients to be critical with data and with data sources they need. So to dig to the ground, what does the data really tell you? but also be very open to new tools and new possibilities. And so this brings us in the position where we are still using official statistics, where we are still using face-to-face surveys, so really dinosaurs in terms of data sources. But we were also part of the consortium that was doing the mobile positioning feasibility study for Eurostat. I think we have been using the Airbnb scrape data even before AirDNA was like rolling this out as a business model on a larger scale. And right now, let's say the hottest stuff is let's say trying on real-time sensor data, doing forecasting on to be applied in visitor management, and also trying to apply AI there. That's not my expertise, so please no questions for that. But I think that's where the things are going. And for destinations, we also see, let's say the reality has become more complex. The reaction time is shorter, so they have to react faster. And what we also see is that these destinations are managed much more professional than, I mean, I'm now 20 years or something in the business, so it's much more, it has become much more professional. And also this profession of, let's say, a good strategist who's also a good data analyst. This is something, at least in Europe and in Germany, the destinations that I have in mind, that has like really grown, and where this position was not really there 20 years ago. There you had a marketing boss who had a big experience and was basing a lot of his decisions mostly on experiences and the feeling of the stomach. And this doesn't necessarily make the decisions bad, but now it's really much more data-based, and also, let's say it's really this strategic thinking of having a goal, trying to support the goals with data, and then going on. But still, I think the basics stay the same. So this person who is in charge of running a destination has to ask the right questions, and then select the right tools and the right data sources. And in the end, like build a puzzle or build an ecosystem of data. So of their own data from their destination, from their, let's say, their organization, official data, and of course, commercial data. And I think there we have the position that the toolbox is getting bigger. So the possibilities to measure stuff is getting much bigger. And there is a tendency that we think the old stuff is bad and outdated and the new stuff is cool, which I think is a little bit dangerous, because often the old stuff was built for this specific purpose, for instance, tourism statistics. And I think they are really, really good and proven for what they are good at. So you really have to find out where to apply the new stuff, and then often also acknowledge that with the new stuff, you use data that was not really collected for this purpose. And this was also, for instance, in this Eurostat study that we were digging or talking with the mobile phone operators who knew they were sitting on a pile of gold with their data and wanting to explore this mobile positioning data with something. But the reality is now that in Germany, at least, they have all stepped out of that market, because it's not so easy really to exploit this obvious data richness and the good things that you can do with this data. And so I think there are some challenges for the DMO. So they have to select, but also they have to if they select and they know, and even they are very updated, they have to get the access to the data. And this is often something that has to do with money and but also with knowledge and with human resources, because usually big data is really time consuming to put sense into big data. And what you also find often is that it looks very shiny when you hear about it, and you're very enthusiastic when you learn about the new possibilities. But then when you try to apply it for your own problems, like the problem solving helpfulness becomes soon much smaller. So what our experience is that there is definitely no one-fits-all solution. And what we also find is that usually the new sources and the new possibilities that come, they complement the old ones, but so far they don't replace them. So it's really, the puzzle is getting bigger, the world is getting more complex. And for this, you need these smart people in the destinations that use it. And if they use it wisely, I think they can they can really, they can very fine tune the management of the destination. Also, for instance, to the last part of your question with the sustainability, these real-time data with sensors for visitor management, tackling over-tourism, tackling carrying capacities in nature reserves, for instance, I think it can be helpful, but it's still some way to go. And this way to go, I think, has to be together. So I think these meetings of us, but of us also exchanging with the destinations, I think this is really, really key. And then I think also this open data topic is very key, that in the end, we struggle a lot with the data that is there once it's there. So if we can eliminate a little bit the accessibility and the availability and have agreements on open data, this would help a lot to focus our energy on the like making use of the new data.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot what you just said there, and you're right, it was a very big question. I think you might have to cover it a lot. I think some things to reflect on is, you know, start with a question that you want to answer, not just start with big sets of data, is really critical. I think something which you really pulled, which Richard mentioned, I think I certainly agree with, is collaboration, both for different types of information. So one part looking at the big data, but also using your judgment at the same time. And I think that's really critical. What, you know, the sensor question is really interesting. Just, I know that in Scotland, we're trying some examples, putting sensors on beaches that get busy, and it's great, but it's hard work. So it's definitely worth it.
I can get you in touch with my colleague, because I'm out of bounds there, but I listen, and it sounds really great, but also very challenging at the same time.
Absolutely, you've got to experiment, you've got to try new things, and it sounds like you're doing some good experimentation. And on that point of experimentation and research, I'm going to move on to Eleonora. So Eleonora, I was going to ask, you're doing some really interesting research in using data analytics, machine learning in tourism. Could you share some of that with us, and some of the work from your colleagues? And what are some of the most interesting, innovative examples that you've seen across the academic world?
Yeah, before starting, I would like to briefly summarize some of my research outcomes. Before the pandemic, one of the most quoted research that I conducted was based on image analytics of the pictures of hotels posted online by users. And we selected some luxurious hotel in London city center. And when we made this systematic collection of the pictures from Instagram, and then we analyzed the most photographed pictures, we noticed that there was a mismatch with the image promoted by the hotel on their web page. So, for instance, many of these hotels promoted the view out of the window as these fantastic rooms with this amazing view of London. However, one of the most photographed things by tourists was the bath. And in one of these hotels, there was even not one picture of the bath. So it means that hotel managers were promoted not exactly the most attractive elements for tourists. So it means that they are not actually conducting an efficient analysis of their data. So from these platforms, we can easily collect and analyze automatically these elements. But it was before COVID, when we had many tourists visiting the places. Due to the COVID, we noticed that the main impact for tourism was to stop tourism, closing the city, so no one could enter or leave. And it was a huge dramatic impact for tourism business. What we did was thinking about solution to avoid this kind of lockdown. So how to provide a safe tourism path or journey even during an health emergency. So we considered the case of London, which is a quite big city with a huge number of visitors, inhabitants, and even contagion. We collected the daily number of infects in London from the NHS and government publications, and we evaluated for each borough, for each London borough, the probability to meet an infect.
Okay.
And through this analysis, we developed this map, which we call it the density probability risk map, and we organized the area, the borough, from weak to high risk of contagion. So we noticed, and we place on the map also the main attraction. And we saw that not all the zones of London have the same probability to meet an infect and contract the contagion. So closing the whole city means is not an effective way with these modern technologies and math tool. So in this way, we created a sort of path within the areas. In other way, if let's say a certain borough of London, let's say Barnet Borough, which is zone 4 in London, shows a weak risk, why people cannot go there, why tourists cannot go there, and then okay, if a Big Ben in the center is on a high risk area, why not having a bus starting from this weak area, crossing the high risk area without stopping, or stopping there but without giving tourists the possibility to go out and explore. But what about just stopping the bus and taking pictures without leaving the bus? It means that they can still visit the city without risk. And this research has just been accepted in one of the top tourism journals. So in few days, I hope it will be available online and everyone can read this. So what we did was developing some new machine learning algorithm to develop this. And this is another way to use public available data to support tourism also during emergencies. We further asked potential tourists from other countries to evaluate their willingness to visit the destination with this kind of map. And they, especially for certain age, they were quite willing to visit because they felt reassured, even if there are still other risks while traveling. But they know that, for instance, London with that data can be somehow safety. So the idea, what we do is using this data and developing new models based on machine learning algorithms to improve tourism experience, and in this case to make it safer in order to avoid lockdown or stop to tourism activities. And concerning examples, they are not still much advanced as they could be. But I remember before the pandemic, there was a nice example that I even showed to my students from Accor Hotel. On the website and on the app, they gave the possibility to get some recommendation of the possible hotel to stay based on their mood. So let's say they were able somehow to identify tourist mood, and based on this suggest some hotels. And I think this is also one of the main trend, making customized recommendations, because we know that sometimes tourists just want to plan a holiday, but they are not already sure where to go. So some kind of recommender systems, but advanced, could make more customized individual recommendations, which are more useful. And this was quite nice. However, during the pandemic, they stopped this, but I hope that they will start again. And I'm also aware that during the pandemic, some hotel chains introduced automatic check-in based on face recognition. I also worked on face recognition as a way to evaluate customer satisfaction in a certain service encounter. But it could be another future solution if in the hotel or in other attraction to automatically understand what tourists feel, how they feel, and how they evaluate the actual experience.
There's 4 really interesting examples there, and they all have different flavors. So, I mean, the first one, which you're talking about for me, where you're using image recognition and everyone's taking photos of a bath, it makes you think about, first of all, there's this whole tranche of data in social media, in images, and these new techniques to be able to explore it so that it helps you change what you do. And having stayed in some London hotels, you never get the view you want, but you might get the great bath. So that's really, really interesting. The second one, which you're talking about, which sounds fascinating, really speaks to the moment where we are unable to travel, or over the next couple of years, we're gonna have to come up with new ways of tailoring how we travel on areas and trying to moderate where we go based on different infection rates, various things like that. And we actually did something quite similar at the University of Edinburgh. Dr. Rick Sarkar led it, and we were looking at the festival time in Edinburgh. It gets really busy, and understanding where infections may peak and where they may go. So I'll share that with you. And I think that's really interesting, because that's almost data for policy in tourism and data for government understanding. I think that's a really great example. And then when you're talking about Accor hotels and looking at mood and how that influences where you go, that's personalization. That is like a customizable use of data to try and improve people's customer experience or make better decisions using data. That's a great example. Facial recognition, now we could have a whole 5-hour conversation around that and its potential acceptability, but it's the technology's there, it's being used. How should we use it? So that's remarkable and really interesting stuff. So thank you so much. And I'm just going to very briefly bring in Daniele, just from your perspective, working in the European Commission, are you seeing some interesting examples, especially where it's perhaps university business collaboration?
Well, let's say that from our perspective, or from my personal perspective, and from the place where I work, we see things in a sort of horizontal way. Yeah? So I will say a bit more later, but what we do is contributing to a sort of data market, both from the, let's say, the open data perspective, and mostly what can come from the public bodies, but also working more and more also on trying to facilitate the exchange of data coming from the private sector. So we do not have any explicit or specific approach to this. Nevertheless, I think that again, more in general, I think that it's very interesting what I just heard from Eleonora, because her work in taking stock and reusing data with artificial intelligence algorithm and try to interpret a lot of things. Of course, it's quite maybe even funny to think that you try to interpret the expression. And I just heard, for example, between parentheses, that call centers are more and more interpreting the tone of the voice of people who call centers, and they direct the call to specialized people who, for example, are able to deal with people who is very angry, rather than with people who is calm and just want to ask questions. So, but anyway, so for what we can do in this respect, of course, we have this general approach, which puts together, let's say, 3 components, which allow a good exploitation of data. So we think that we need, on one hand, artificial intelligence algorithms as much as possible available, and let's say also supported in a certain sense. We need a huge availability of data in a form and in a way that can be exploited by AI, We are no more, we are still, but of course AI cannot just rely on data that you download and then so you need something which allows an easy exchange machine to machine. And there is also a third component, which can also be interesting, maybe again in general, which is that we want to set up an infrastructure with high performance computing based in Europe. So these three components, we work in my unit on the data side, but the other two components together with the data should compose a sort of overall framework which should facilitate and, as we think, support the development of digital in Europe. Then of course, I can mention, of course, the supporting programs of the European Commission, the Horizon 2020, and now the Horizon Europe, which can support activities and projects like the one which was mentioned.
Yes, yeah. I think your customer service example is completely relevant for tourism, because so much of what tourism is creating a good customer service. Hopefully, not too many angry customers, but I think there's some really interesting ways that voice data could be potentially utilized. And one thing, just reflecting on what Eleonora was saying again around, there's some really interesting projects there coming out of Bristol and elsewhere, and then potentially using some of the data like open data that you're providing, Daniele. But and collaborating with universities is a good way of getting started. And I think it's a good opportunity for me now to bring in Ivan, because how do you get started using data, especially in tourism, where there's so many small, medium companies that you'll be working with at Orioli? What advice do you have for these small, medium companies getting started with data? And why is it important for these small businesses?
Well, I can tell you, I would like to refer to some valid points provided by Ulf. So the challenge is always what we want to accomplish. If you're a company and you want to go, for example, online, we work with companies from tourism activity segment, but also we work with destinations that want to promote the experience of the destination. So the question is, okay, what we want to accomplish. So if you're a company that's just starting and you want to put your offer online, I would say the challenge is a lot of these small SMB companies do not, 1 out of 5 companies from this segment uses online booking options. So lots of them are still in a way offline. So the question, when they start going, big data, AI, for them, this is just a buzzword. So then we go, okay, what do they want to accomplish? They want to start selling online through their website. Where do they want to connect to? Do they want to distribute the data in other places? Are they really sure that they have, do know how to promote it? These are all the questions. So they start selling online on their own website, but they have few visitors on their website. So the question is, once they put the data in some booking system, how they can move this data and distribute it to other channels. And then the question is, okay, which channels do they want to use? For example, we know a lot of big OTAs that they can connect to, which is good. But the question is this a good strategy? Because these OTAs are good to start building visibility, but it's bad for branding. And then we tell them, okay, you have, for example, if you're doing tours and experience, and you have B&Bs or hotels in your region, could they become your selling channels in a way that people can book right now, not do calls and emails or so? And for that, this is really important. They have data in some digital form so they can easily distribute their booking system. And when it comes to the destination level, I had a really interesting year, 2020, because we were on lockdown. So last year, since I'm from Croatia, I visited 76 cities, destinations in Croatia, from top to bottom, east to the west. And I would say this can apply to many other destinations, countries we work with in Germany, South Africa, Mexico. So it seems like when you Google or try to find some information, a lot of tourism boards say, yeah, the data is there. You can Google, you can find us. But we often see some basic company information, and then you cannot do any action. You can go on some big OTAs and you will see so many data. So people cannot pick. So it's and then when you want to pick, it's there's no booking option. So then the challenge is, okay, what to do with it? We often talk with destinations saying your goal should be how to like gather what is like the unique offer of your small destination, but destination in general, categorize it, and then offer these small companies to distribute this data, because that way the small companies can get visibility. They can use some I would say unused selling channels like accommodation. You know, when you book we were talking yesterday, I booked a house on the coast side, and I come to the owner and I say, okay, what can you recommend? So we need to point people to the right direction and tell them this is the data that can be easy to understand, and also there is call to action. So when destinations can gather, this is summer project that we do, we talk with destinations and say, let's gather the offer of the destination, so each company can use this data for their managing their own business and sell online. But also once the destination gathers all this offer, then the tourist gets a good motive why to visit certain destination. Like for example, you will not come to, I don't know, Bavaria or Croatia or something just because you want to travel because of one sightseeing spot, one hidden gem. You want to know about 5 of them. And especially during this pandemic, as I said, I visited 76 destination cities in Croatia, all forts, fortresses, and so. But my idea was, okay, I found a good place to eat, sightseeing, history spot, plus something, and basically I can build my own small package on my personal arrangement, and then I want to go there. So I think this is why it's important to gather, collect this data, and make it reusable, sellable. So it's not just you see basic information and then you get frustrated because you cannot do any action. So this is why important. Try to collect this data as the easiest way possible. Start doing small, but plan how to distribute it, along with DMOs who should also do that job, because once you gather this, you can do so much. You can distribute it to other OTAs, and then your local destination can grow, which is also important for sustainability, for extending the season, and that way you can, do entire circle cost.
I mean, first of all, I'm dreaming of visiting 76 different locations in Croatia already. It's a privilege to do that. It would be sensational. I think just reflecting on some of the things that you've just been describing. One was, you're right, these small businesses, the basics first, right? They're often very, they don't have the capacity perhaps. And what you're then saying is making those decisions that are most fundamental to that business around where to sell, how to do it, where to distribute your product. And then the 2 things which really stood out are collaboration with experts who can help you do it. So people like yourselves, other companies that can help you bring that data together, advise where do you put your products for sale, but also collaboration at destination level, because so many of these businesses they're all interconnected. So I think that's a really powerful way forward, I think, for some of these small businesses. And I just wanted to very briefly bring in Samantha, just around, we were chatting yesterday before this event, and we were just talking about data quality and how to get your data ready. So Samantha, what are your thoughts, just especially for small businesses, around how they manage their data, or how do they get started with data?
Yeah, so I think a couple of important things that makes a data set valuable. Well, actually, I'll take a step back and give a little bit of context, because I actually approach sort of data monetization and data utilization from a different perspective than everyone else on the panel. So Alchemy was set up back in 2019, and we saw a gap in the market to connect supply and demand of data, so specifically alternative data. Companies that are, generating loads, volumes and volumes of interesting, valuable data, don't necessarily sort of understand the concept of data monetization and external monetization. And so we sort of help these businesses productize their data and develop a go-to-market strategy targeting our network of buyers. Now, they are predominantly in the investment management space. So asset managers that are looking for unique data sets to help provide them with an information advantage and helps sort of drive and facilitate their investment decisions. So that's sort of the approach that we take. And with our clients, when we're advising, data providers on sort of the most important attributes to a data set for our specific buyers, there are quite a lot of specific things, such as coverage. So how broad a coverage, that obviously helps, I suppose, give a bigger picture analysis for our particular consumers. We look at depth, we look at breadth, we look at frequency. So our buyers and consumers of data are specifically looking for hopefully daily, if not real time, and not so much sort of quarterly type things, because it doesn't really provide an information advantage. Timeliness, so delivering to these third parties at the same time every single day. Consistency, making sure that your data set is consistent across the fields. And also usage restrictions, that's quite important. So a lot of our data provider clients are, for example, SaaS companies. So if the SaaS company is, providing a platform, a service to their users, they don't necessarily own that data, and therefore obviously can't distribute that to other third parties unless they're sort of contractually customized. So and another, I suppose, a couple of points more specific to the investment management space is history. So making sure that these data sets have a certain amount of history, because it helps back test trend analysis, and also uniqueness. I mentioned before, investment managers are always looking to find unique data sets to help provide an information advantage, basically. And lastly, being mapped to stock IDs. So it's not essential, it's not crucial for our users, but it does improve the value. Now, all those sort of attributes, in order to sort of achieve those, there are certain internal processes and procedures which help obviously support the efficient data management and support distribution to third parties.
Yeah, so there's something there then about having clean, high quality data. And you were saying that these tourism and travel data sets are valuable to people outside the industry, and it'd be really great to hear how you see those data sets being used within how travel and tourism data sets are being used. And then the second thing, the follow-up question after that, would be a bit related to what Ulf was saying at the start around these other third-party data sets like mobile phone data and other things. Why is there a challenge still in utilizing those? So to summarize, the first one question is, how are travel and tourism data sets being used by third parties? And then second, how can we start accessing some of these other alternative data sets for tourism?
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously the coronavirus pandemic has put the travel and tourism industries under unprecedented stress. And so as travel starts to resume, our buyers of data in the investment management space are using travel and tourism data to help analyze which companies within these industries are returning to pre-crisis financial performance, pre-crisis norms, as we call it. So, and also on the flip side, which ones unfortunately won't. And so basically using data to help understand and drive investment decisions. Travel habits also from a corporate and business perspective is also changing considerably. So as we sort of move to a more virtual world, they're sort of utilizing this data to help understand the rate of recovery in which particular industries, who is returning to sort of pre-pandemic norms in terms of their business travel, and it's most importantly, I think, for our buyers, consumers of market, because business and corporate travel is one of the biggest profit drivers for airlines. So it's trying to figure out which routes are sort of performing over others, which airlines are performing, over others. Another sort of, I suppose, interesting way that they're utilizing travel and tourism data is for analysing tourism activity to help understand sort of macroeconomic indicators. I think it's important to be able to understand these statistics, obviously before they're released publicly, and their competitors have access to the same type of data. So we've got a couple of clients in the travel, tourism and hospitality space, which has seen a significant increase in demand from asset managers. So to your second question, why is it difficult for governments and sort of other corporates to utilize data? I think is because data is becoming more and more seen as a commodity. And so, corporates that own and are generating this type of data want to maintain the value. And so they are only choosing specific buyers and specific users of this data who have the budgets and are willing to sort of, I suppose, maintain a certain value. I think another maybe challenge, and it's probably more specific to the European industry, but is GDPR. And so, a lot of companies that we come across who are inquiring or interested about understanding the concept of external monetization, one of their biggest concerns is GDPR, not exposing sort of their users to privacy concerns. And so, I think that obviously sort of holds them back from exploiting the opportunity of data sharing. From our perspective and our buyers' perspective, they're not necessarily looking for data to tie back to an individual person. They're more interested in a sort of broader trend analysis. So it actually, avoids any sort of GDPR regulations. And so we try to help educate data providers to understand that.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because there's a bit of fear around how to manage these big data sets, even at a big corporate level. And I think that's really interesting. So you're helping them understand the potential of that data, and there's huge potential in tourism, as I think all of you were saying right at the start. It's challenging, but there is a lot of potential there. Ivan, I know when we were chatting yesterday in advance of this, we were talking about some of the big data sets you could potentially access as a small tourism company. I just wanted to see if you've got any of the final reflections just around that.
Yes, I mean, Samantha pointed this out. So sometimes we have people who are not sure how to use data, but often they don't know how to find data. And I like to say, if you have a problem looking, for example, if you're using Google Trends to see what are like some common keywords, what are people looking for, a lot of people don't know about it. So they I always say, if you're the first person that have this problem, then the question is out of 7 billion people, is this really a problem or not?
Yeah.
So, and this is the challenge, that people don't know how to use data, how to find data sources and how to manage them. So for example, we have a lot of companies that want to prepare their data and see what is the demand. But for example, they don't know how to use Google Trends. Some companies, use SEMrush to check data. And we say, look, sometimes they need to pay for this data. But then I always like to say, okay, if you need to pay to access certain data, it's maybe better to pay for it rather than spend 6 months trying to do something and then lose your time. For example, we are using some, marketing. We are recommending some SEO, SEM tools just to see, okay, what to do, how to approach, how to do marketing, which keywords to use, what are some trending terms people are looking, what kind of offer, because often we see sometimes people are in their business and they use some keywords which are not the ones tourists are looking for. And we always say, okay, sometimes try to investigate your competitors also, how they're approaching. But this is also can apply to the destination as well. Often we see people are visiting websites of the destinations, and there the content is not right. I would say encyclopedia, Wikipedia content, which is not applied for tourists. And in this situation, we just try to tell them, okay, you are not the first one that is having this problem. How the others approach that. And I think it's important, especially I would say during this pandemic, where, you know, if you go to big, I don't know, WTM or ITB fair, you know, years ago, it was always how the businesses are going, everything's great. But we starting from last year, people are saying it's a challenge, and we have this option. And my opinion is, I believe people started sharing more information how to approach and solve business problems. So we also see people exchanging ideas how to approach data, how to use it. But again, the idea is what you want to accomplish. What do you want to solve some basic problems and start with that in phases, or you know, you just want to do something but you're not sure what to do.
Yeah, it's and you provided a wonderful segue as well, by the way, by mentioning Wikipedia and Google Trends and all this sort of stuff, you know, to now to what I'm going to ask Daniele about, which is we've just talked about corporate data, we've just talked about Google and other data sets that you can access, but there's a big movement around open data, and you're leading the charge from a European Commission perspective. And so a couple of questions I had was, could you tell us more around the Open Data Directive, and could you reflect a little bit around where you see the power of open data for sustainable tourism management and sustainable tourism more generally?
Thank you, Joshua. So yes, thank you for this opportunity to say a few words on what we are doing in the Commission. Actually, the Open Data Directive is the last piece of legislation in a long series of directives, which the first one dates back to 2003, I think. It was formerly called the Public Sector Information Directive. And now we saw that renaming it gives also a bit more a good image, and it's more meaningful in terms of not underlining where data comes from, Public Sector Information Directive, but how data should be shared. The scope of the directive is still the same, because well, within the let's say the mandate that we have, we cannot really set obligation on private companies. So, well, in a certain way, yes, but the principle on which the Open Data Directive is based is that public administration generate, executing their mandate, data. So they first do generate data because they have, for example, a cadastral agency needs to maintain a cadastral database for taxation purposes, let's say, or for knowing who owns what. But we started from the principle that this data, first, are data normally paid by public money. So they are a sort of public, not necessarily they are all of public interest, but they could be public interest, and since they have been paid for a certain scope, which has already been fulfilled, they should be made available to everybody. Because we think, as it also said, I think, several times today, that data can be reused in different ways, and not necessarily only for the scope for which they have been collected the first time. So read this principle of saying, okay, these are public and common property, even if it doesn't mean that there is no copyright, but this data should be reused as much as possible. So this is why we address, since probably a couple of decades, public administration saying, okay, now you have a certain number of obligations to make this available, this data available to everyone. In the different versions of this directive, the obligations have been more and more made strong, let's say. So the first version was very, very light in a way, and now we have moved more and more to the direction of really thinking to open data, which means open data in the sense that it must be free of charge. Is less and less possibility of exception to have still some data redistributed under payment, with the exclusion of any kind of limitation on the reuse of this data. So there is no limitation, for example, on the fact that data coming from a public administration could only be reused for non-commercial purposes, because we even start from the approach that data are beneficial for the digital economy in general. So they should profit not only the other public administrations or research and so on, which is of course very good, but also they should profit the private sector to make benefits, and then, well, the benefits are in a way, at least in theory, redistributed over the whole society, creating new jobs and so on. So the last step, so the last version, let's say, of the directive, creates a really strong obligation on public administration in Europe. So there are really few exceptions apart from the security of confidentiality and the GDPR, which is of course fully applicable. Very few exceptions on how this data can be made available. And even more, embedded into this last version of the Open Data Directive, there is the mandate on the Commission to define a regulation, so another piece of legislation, which defines specific datasets, which we call high-value datasets, which must comply with even more obligation than all the other ones. And in particular, they have to comply with two things which are extremely important. They have to be completely free of charge, wherever they come from, and they must be made available through APIs. And this is really a big step forward compared to the obligations that are out there in general, because the directive in general speaks of this data set must be made available in some way. Which means that you may have a repository, you have something that you can access online, but not necessarily this is the best way, of course, of accessing data if you think to a machine-to-machine connection, or if you want to create an application which needs to access constantly data which are maybe real-time data. So this obligation of creating APIs, of course, it's a certain financial burden to public administration, but it's something that we wanted to explicitly include exactly because we want to promote more and more the development of application, and not just, even if it is not as important, not only having the citizens able to access certain kinds of data. I think I need to be a bit short. One thing that I would like to mention, because it was raised, for example, by Ivan, one of the problems of all this data is that, first of all, you need to discover them. Maybe they are out there, but you don't know where they are, or you do know that they exist. So again, since the beginning, or since at least 6 or 7 years, in order to facilitate the discoverability and the accessibility of this data, which are made available under certain form by public bodies in member states, we have set up a so-called European data portal. So it's a portal which basically contains a catalog which is built on the top of the normally on the top of the national open data portals, but also on some other portals. So a catalog which has the advantage, first of all, of being one single entry point at the European level, especially, of course, if you want to know what kind of data set on a certain subject is available in more than one country. And also, it has the advantage of having a catalog which is fully harmonized. So what we do is to collect or to put together the catalogs and the metadata from all the different national or local European portals, and convert all these metadata in a single metadata standard. So that as a user, you can connect and search whatever kind of data sets in the portal. The portal has now more than 1,300,000 data sets referenced on many subjects, including tourism. And of course, the next step will be also to make available through this portal the APIs which will be created under this new regulation. And last but not least, I think it is something which is also important for the accessibility. So we speak very often on interoperability of dataset and reusability. Of course, you have the technical reusability, you need to know the format, you need to know how the attributes are created, but it's also important to know how your data can be reused. Even if there is a basic rule that all data can be reused in any way, you may have different ways of, for example, mentioning the source, doing something like that. So another thing that is clearly shown in the portal is the license which is associated to this data. Voilà. Maybe I can stop here because I see that there are only a few minutes left.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity.
You've introduced a amazing resource, 1 million data sets, some potentially relevant for tourism, and have been having to dig through data sets that are very unclean in the past. It's lovely to hear that there's a great standard around interoperability, around the creation of APIs. So I think that's really great. We've only got a couple of minutes left, so I'm going to go back to Ulf first, and just to ask Ulf, you started us off, you've listened to everyone else talk, and I'd just get some of your quick reflections. And if there was one thing you wanted our audience to go away with at the end of this event.
I think we've seen the challenge, but I think we've also seen the opportunities. And I think for companies or destinations or anybody in tourism wanting to use data, I think it's really first make up your mind what you really need and then start digging. And if you don't find it yourself, I think you can also go for help and try to look for best practice and for collaboration. And I think we heard that. I think this is usually really a good start. And I think without collaboration, we're all lost. So I think this is the first thing I would do.
Yes, critical. I couldn't agree more. Eleonora, have you got any sort of one thing that you would like the audience to go away with from your perspective?
Yeah, we showed the opportunities, and we can say that it will be the ability to really use this data and create value will be the new competitive advantage. And it will make differences among tourism businesses.
Yes, and so the final thoughts, Samantha, anything you want the audience to go away with quickly? Or you're on mute.
I think the most important thing for sort of anyone considering to either, from our perspective, distribute their data so that it is, or can be, accessed by third parties is really important behind, implementing internal processes and procedures to support efficient data management.
Fantastic. And Daniele, I know you need to head off. So your final thought, anything you'd want the audience to go away with?
Yes, thank you. I think that the message that I would like to give here is that be creative. So that there are maybe sources of information which are straightforward in this case for tourism. But I think that what is even more important that there are so many sources of information out there, and that it's very important to be able to exploit as much as possible something that maybe at the first glance would not really be interesting or not just appropriate, but after. And I think that this example of trying to interpret the voice of someone to try to redirect him or her to a certain kind of a person, or in this case offer maybe the most appropriate kind of hotel or place to stay because you are someone who gives the impression to be made in a certain way. I think it's very important. Even if I have to remind as a commission that we still have to be extremely respectful of the GDPR and exploit all data that we can, but without touching any personal data and interest.
In a safe and secure way, no, 100%. And last but certainly not least, Ivan, what's your final thought just as we leave?
I can fully agree with all of us. I like to say, Daniela said, be creative and be pragmatic. Companies need to provide the data, what they provide in tourism as an offer, and destination needs to use this data. So once the destination has this data, they can help these companies, and it's a life cycle. So in order to grow the destination, they need companies, and the companies need destinations. And it's like make a full circle couple of times per year and so on.
Well, thank you so much to the wonderful panel. Some amazing insights, some great ideas, some great examples, and I've thoroughly enjoyed it. And I've got about 5 different connections to make right now, so that's always a sign of a good event. Just to quickly note that this recording will be on the CAST website, so everyone else can enjoy it, and I'll certainly promote it. And thank you everyone who has put the time in to join us today. Thanks again to the wonderful panel, and thank you to the CAST network for hosting today. So have a lovely rest of your day, and thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
You. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.